shortcomings as well. So, what does a cluster grouped classroom look like? So this example up here gives you a kind of a peek at what would happen if you have 104 students spread across 4 classes. Classroom A would be your gifted cluster, right? So we have 26 students. Here you have 8 identified in this group, 9 and 9. Here you have high achieving students, average students, below average, and then students who are far below average. So what we're doing is we're taking every student, so we're identifying our entire population, as I mentioned before. Everybody in the room is being identified and being placed into one of these groups. Okay? Then once I have that information, I'm going to make clusters. That's actually the first thing you do, is you make gifted clusters based upon the number of students you identify. So there's not a program where you say, well, we're identifying 5% of the kids, and we draw a line at the top 5%. In a cluster grouping model, you set a benchmark based on the peers in the district, and at that benchmark, that is where you draw the line. So this is for a group where you might find you have a single cluster. It's not uncommon where you might have 2 clusters of gifted students and 2 that are not. Okay? The benefit here is that these students now become the top students in their class. So if you have ever been in a class or a course, whether it was K-5 or higher ed, where you had an academic peer who really, no matter how hard you tried, was far and above you, you realize how difficult that situation is. Even though you might be an excellent student, you can carry that over to really any part of life. I kind of made the analogy, if you think about playing like basketball, if you're a great basketball player and you're on the team with Michael Jordan, well, you might be a great basketball player, but he's one of the greatest basketball players. And you're really always going to be playing second fiddle as long as this group of really high achieving peers is in that classroom with you. So now what we've done is we've also opened up a benefit to our high achieving students who are doing quite well. Now go back to what I talked about earlier, where I talked about the entire spread of the room, right? So if we think about that spread as being 5 groups, now typically a teacher has to teach all 5 of those groups, right? I'm going to have students in my class who are gifted, and I'm going to have students in my class who are far below average. And in that lesson, I need to reach all of those students. Okay? That's not just a big ask, it's really an impossible ask. And so this model seeks to solve that problem. Because if you look at this now, teacher A, how many different groups do they have to reach? 3. Okay, not 5. Now you might look at the other one and say, Brian, look, 4, that's not that much better. But if you think for a second, what will we probably have here for these students? Yeah, in-class support accommodations, right? There are laws that protect those students. Our IDEA tells us we need to make sure those students achieve. So we have safeguards in place to get those students the assistance they need. So these teachers, they'll be leaning on assistants to help them. So they're really dealing with spread of 3 as well. And that is the layout or kind of the plan for cluster group. So once again, 5 categories. The placement would be determined in the spring for the following year. You would determine your clusters, you would set up your classes, and within those, you could then flexibly group or do other things, but the cluster grouping model is the overarching principle for all your scheduling and building. So, you say, well, why not make small groups? You have 50 students in every classroom. Well, that's where we are now, right? And we know what happens is the range of abilities you grow up, I spoke about this before, those gifted students will not get the services they need. Okay, so the cluster grouping model helps us solve that problem. Other things as well, right? We have to spread our training out, okay, many different issues with having in every classroom. So what are the benefits? Abilities of all teachers, improving student achievement, raising expectations for all students, and challenging gifted students on a full-time basis, which is obviously the key. So we want to challenge the gifted students all day, every day, but at the same time, assist teachers in providing benefits to all the kids in their class through a cluster grouping model. So, now for the recommendation for the timeline. These are the overall recommendations. This is by the end of the program. Okay, so by the end of the implementation, what would I recommend we do as a district? And I would recommend the following. That we implement the cluster grouping model with flexible grouping grades 3 through 8. That we hire 1 gifting specialist for each K-5 school. That we identify and implement a technology resource to support G&T and enrichment K math, English language arts. Continue enrichment K-8, create and implement a telescope G&T math curriculum 3 through 5, and reinvent the binder program, which is what we currently have as enrichment. Okay? So how do we get there? What is the timeline? Okay, there's 2 possibilities. Like anything, you slow. I think there are benefits to doing it a little more quickly, but really there are limitations to how fast you implement something across multiple grade levels with students in a program. So here's a potential implementation timeline. Okay, in year one, that would be starting this summer. Hiring one teacher with specialization in gifted education, reinventing the parent binder program, which is already scheduled to take place this summer as a curriculum writing project. Select, purchase, and implement a technology solution to support G&T, and plan for cluster grouping starting fall of 2015. Right? So next year really is the planning year for cluster grouping and a bolstering of our enrichment program. Years 2 through 4, writing a telescope curriculum for math 3 through 5. That's the summer of 2015. Hire 3 additional teachers. Okay, 1 per building, transition from training to instruction. So remember, this is over multiple years, right? It's over several years. Implementing a cluster grouping model 3 through 5, 1 grade per year. Implementing a telescope math curriculum, grades 3 through 5. And continuing the enrichment for K-5 in math, English, science, and arts. And in year 4, finally, rolling this program up through the middle school. Okay. So that's good, but I think a little slow. Okay, so how can we get there a little more quickly? Well, I'll warn you, like anything, if you want to get there a little more quickly, it does cost a little more money, which you probably expect that to do this, we need more manpower, more gifted specialists in the classroom. So implementation timeline 2 is another possibility. And think about maybe the sweet spot, about as fast as we can do it, I think, and do it well and right. I mean, there's a way to, Brian can't be hired just forward 1 year and do the whole thing and do every grade, and, could be, maybe. I just don't think it would look very good if you have a poorly implemented program, because it would just be kind of a hasty implementation. I think this is really the sweet spot for where we'd like to be. That's hiring 2 teachers this year with specialization in gifted education, reinventing the parent binder program. Actually, if it's in black, it was there before. So I'll talk about that again, because I've already read. Those are the differences between the prior slides. So what do we get? We get a flexible grouping in math and ELA grades 3-5. So that means right off the bat, next year at 3, 4, and 5, we will have a teacher split between 2 schools that's going to be able to flexibly group to take those students identified in mathematics, or another English language arts if you wish, and take those students and flexibly group them at any point in time and say, you students are really doing well. I'm going to take them on Thursday afternoon and we're going to do a math lesson. Okay? I'm going to take them out of that class. Or I'm going to come into that class in the system. So they'll be able to flexibly group students on the fly, which is a good thing. And in year 2, implementing, instead of 1 year at a time, implementing cluster grouping in grades 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so instead of a year-by-year rollout, we get to roll out all 3 years at the same time. So what are the costs? Each new staff member you hire is around, if we average it, we take a rough number, around $70,000 including family. That's including salary and benefits. Technology platform, I used a number of the quote I had for one that I looked at, was around $18,000. They really go from, $6,000 all the way up through much, much higher than that. The interesting thing, or I guess troubling thing sometimes with technology, is that these platforms are very robust and very powerful, but the current model of software is a yearly cost. Right? These are cloud solutions. It's not like the old days that you buy 200 licenses of Microsoft Windows and you had, that was it, yours to have. These are all cloud-based solutions, and hence they have a yearly cost. Enrichment binder revision was already budgeted for and in progress. Summer staff training for cluster grouping teachers would be about $2,000. The trained teachers would be the cluster teachers for the upcoming year. Grade level gifted curriculum writing around $2,400 to do the curriculum writing for the telescope curriculum. And I put the last question up there is, can we do it for less? I will say, if you look at cluster grouping, it is designed to do it as simply the model I showed you with no additional teachers. But if you do it that way, that's not included flexible grouping. So if we talk about doing a gifted mathematics program rolled into it, we're going to telescope the curriculum, that kind of comes off the table. So what I'm talking about is a cluster grouping model with flexible grouping that allows us to do that telescope math curriculum I kind of mentioned. So what do we get? This is the nuts and bolts of it. The main one's the first one, right? Giving teachers that ability to differentiate for a smaller spread of students so you do so more effectively. So not just the gifted students, but that all students are getting the attention that they need. Okay? Identification of all student levels. So we're not just trying to pick out and say, we want to find only the gifted kids in here. We're saying, no, we're looking at all the kids. We're going to assess them all, where they all stand. And we're going to design our classrooms with conscious thought to make sure the decision is right where they're placed for the most effective instruction. A gifted math program that covers grades 3 through 6 by the end of grade 5. Okay, so that's the telescope math curriculum I mentioned. Okay, this is leading us into grade 7. So now, by the end of grade 5, all students have had the end of grade 5. Okay, then they go to grade 6 and they get grade 6. Then they go to algebra for those gifted students. And grade 7 is kind of shoehorned in. We try to meet those standards, and we're trying to meet the Common Core at the same time. So what we're going to try to do is use the gifted program to get those students through grade 6 by grade 5, and then you have grade 7 curriculum taking place in grade 6 as part of that gifted cluster. An enrichment program for gifted and high achieving students K-5. So we're not throwing out the enrichment program. We're layering the enrichment program over. So those students you saw on the prior slide who were high achieving, right? Those students are now the top kids in their class as we pulled out the gifted kids in the gifted cluster. Those kids still need enrichment, right? Those kids who are still above the curve, they need enrichment too. So we need to make a better enrichment program so their needs are being met as well. So that's in this plan as well. Technology support, because the teachers did call for that. There's a lot of the tools that we're not making use of. We can also, luckily, leverage Chromebooks, which we need for part testing anyway, and we're purchasing. Now we found another positive use for the Chromebooks that we're purchasing in the district. Enrichment specialists to teach students, design groupings, and provide training. So not only are these teachers going to start off by teaching students, they're going to be our turnkey trainers as we get the program rolling. And as they switch, the percentages of teaching the training will offset. So we'll start off by teaching half, and then as the program rolls in, they'll do only a little bit of training, where at the very beginning they'll be doing a great deal of training. The last bullet, flexible grouping to allow students to be challenged at a level appropriate to their ability. So during the year, so we cluster groups, but during the year, a teacher decides, hey, we cluster group, but this student right here really needs to get some work with this other group. Doing really well, really turning it on halfway through the year. Well, I have flexible grouping now, so I'm going to take you with me, and we're going to work in this group. Okay? So that's really the benefit where I said, can we do it without extra teachers? Certainly we do it without extra teachers. But then this student is not stuck. Okay? Because cluster grouping doesn't really let me move them effectively. The flexible grouping does, and that's why those enrichment teachers will be so valuable. So, the last slide is back to my earlier slide. That was my goal when I started doing this research and presentation, and the questions there, I wrote down what I thought my answers were to those questions. Type of giftedness, primarily mathematics. But if we have 4 teachers, 1 in each elementary school, we can break down that boundary way beyond that. Okay? I think the next thing we approach into is ELA, especially pushing it down into the lower grades for precocious readers. When will this program take place? Enrichment's going to be K-8. So those binders and other enrichment activities and software that we're going to look to implement, that will be a K-8 process. In math, the gifted talent program in mathematics will be 3 through 12. Obviously, moving up, those students would finally end up being in the AP calculus 2 courses seniors. How do we fund it? Well, general budget, unfortunately, where it would have to come from. Is there a strategy that can meet the above goal? I believe the school-wide cluster grouping model can, along with flexible grouping. Okay, I think those two combine. And how do we select students for the program? We would need multiple measures. So I didn't go into that. That's not something I delved into for this research. That would be something I have to follow up with how we would identify students. We would have the tools to do that. We have some already that exist. And there's an odd year, the fact that we have part testing coming on board next year. How soon will we get the results from that? How effective will they be? It's tough to know. So we're kind of waiting a little bit to see what might be those tools we use to identify students for a gifted talent enrichment program, or all across the spectrum for clustering. So, that's the presentation. I'd like to take questions from the board. Would you like to moderate? Or can I just point to people? Maybe not. Oh, wait a minute, that's the raising. I'll pass the mic.
From the comparative districts that you looked at, is there a particular district that stands out that has a similar program to what you're proposing, and how is it working?
Actually, no. If you go back to it, the programs were, to be quite honest, disappointing. I'm not going to lie. And that's not to say anything, that's not saying anything against any of the districts, they're all fine districts. And if they look at our program right now, they probably say, oh, Burns is a little disappointing right now as well. So I don't think there's anything to be said negative about that. It's just where gifted and talented education is. If you think about the idea of what students do I help, right? If I have these gifted students and struggling students, most programs still worry about these students. And schools don't generally spend a lot of time dedicating the resources up, and most of it's done in programs like this. And they're viable programs. Like I mentioned, all enrichment programs, like some of the SEM models, show benefits. They show benefits to gifted students, and some show benefits to all students. So that model does exist. It is showing that positive benefits, but I think it goes the right way for what we're going to do in this district.
So this is really a ground-up new model that you're putting together.
It is. It is a research-based model. There are plenty of books on it, a lot of research on it. When I post that, you can see quite a bit of it. This is not something brand new, but it's the kind of the current cutting-edge research. Actually, one of the books is, I didn't put it on there because I just got it about 3 weeks ago. There's a lot of research still being done with it, and all of it is very, very positive for all students. It literally shows gains from the low students all the way to the top students, which I thought was a really no-brainer, to be quite honest.
I want to talk about Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers.
Great book.
And he has the Canadian hockey players as they're young, with a January 1st cutoff for age, grouped, and then the January 1st children are more mature than the ones that are born on December 31st. So, to make a long story short, when they make traveling teams and go all the way through, and then they take the date of birth of the professional Canadian hockey players, January, February, March, maybe a few in April, and that's it. And they said, gee, if we were to have 2 leagues or 2 programs for the younger students, one with a January 1st cutoff and the other one with a July 1st cutoff, we could probably double the number of professional players because they would get that extra assistance. I'm bothered by that type of an analysis and the fact that if you have a 3rd grader or a 2nd grader and you put in a lot of tutor time, or the age differential as the Canadian hockey players demonstrate, or maybe the students are really smart, but you run the risk of not helping some of the students that have the same capabilities as the ones you're going to select. So I'm bothered by this. I think it's going to help some, but I think it's going to hurt others, and I don't have an answer for it, but it bothers me.
I have a couple possible answers. One is, there's still an enrichment program. So even if you as a student aren't classified into the gifted cluster, you're still doing well. I realize that as a teacher. Don't forget, now that I don't have to worry about the 4 kids in my class that are really off the charts, now I have more time to worry about you as a student. I can help you out individually as a student because the burden of worrying about these students who are 2 grade levels above is off the table. There's another teacher dealing with all those students, okay? So you have that piece of it. The other piece of it is flexible grouping, like I mentioned. So if 4 months into it, I realize, well, Mike's doing great. He's really coming on strong now. And I'm the enrichment teacher in that school, it's within my power to say, okay, well, I'm going to flex your group today. I'll tell your class, teacher, I want to take Mike with me today into my group and see how he does. I'm going to do an advanced math lesson, see if he is really ready for the rest of the cohort. Okay, so that's another possibility. The other thing is, if you're that student, this is almost what you're saying is, if you think about the cluster grouping, I'm taking the all-star team, and I'm putting them in a room. I'm saying we're not dealing with you as far as comparing these other groups. So now, even though you were the 4th best kid in your class, the other 3 kids are in the cluster group. Who's the number 1 kid in your class now? You, okay? The research has shown this cluster grouping model is very beneficial for those students because they now get to shine. They're raising their hands, they're contributing more, their work improves because they begin to see themselves as more capable without worrying about a student that is so far ahead and so different that they don't even understand, when these are adolescents, not adults, they don't understand how they can catch up. This doesn't even make any sense. How could I ever be there? And so what they do, they actually end up withdrawing. So they found this model benefits that group of kids who is above the average but not gifted as well. So there are a couple ways to handle that. It's not perfect, of course, but
The hockey league in Canada doesn't experience that. Because some of the coaches, they put in more time with kids that aren't quite as good. But by the time they get to the adults in the professional league, why aren't there some Novembers and some Marches?
well, there's some, but we should take the Rangers and the Kings and see who's
That's my
who
concern.
has the most. It's a valid concern. And I think when I mentioned those things that I mentioned, I think to alleviate some of that, nothing's perfect. Like I mentioned in the slide, there is no program, none that exists, that accounts for every single difference in every kid. And that's why I rely on teachers, and that's why having 4 enrichment teachers in the schools will really go a long way to helping the classroom teachers alleviate that problem.
Milburn, I would argue, is the best system that you have here. And they don't have anything like this, and yet they're by far, maybe Princeton along with them, but by far the best test school. So I have my doubts. I have my concerns.
You were certainly on to.
Just to go along with what you just said, we have to be really careful, even with your model that you just presented, with the struggling students, because you have to worry about their confidence level and their ability level too. I mean, I've seen it already happen where certain struggling students are already like, I'm the smart one in the class, and I'll never be the one that gets pulled out or whatever. So that's also concerning. They'll definitely have instructional support, but just in terms of balancing that part of it.
Sure. Now remember, they won't see, this is not necessarily a pull-out model. When I'm talking about flexibly grouping, the gifted cluster, they're in a room all day with, like I had shown. So the kids are not going to say, oh, well, that student's getting pulled out of the room every day and I'm not, so therefore, that's removed. So they're going to be with their peers. So what the research shows is that those students who are not far below, but below the average, when you narrow that spread, it seems more achievable to them, right? They can look at a student who's not that much further ahead of them, who seems reasonable, thinks like they do, understands problems maybe a little faster, and they can strive to reach that model of an above average student as far as achievement goes. Whereas when the gifted students in the room, and if you work with gifted students, many times gifted students, they just don't think like their peers, right? They don't process information. So as an adult, we can just say, oh, well, that's wonderful, and they're gifted, and we can appreciate it. When you're 8, 9, it's still more difficult. So when we take that group and keep them with their peers and other students, plus we have some other students, you can have a more robust classroom for the gifted cluster, but at the same time, make a better heterogeneous mix for the other 2 classrooms. So that's kind of how the model's successful.
I have 4 sets of questions. They're pretty fast. So, first thing is, you referred to something peers and district. So when you're deciding your clusters, you're not going to have a cutoff of, say, you mentioned 5%?
No percentage.
So you're going to have some kind of academic cutoff?
Correct.
So that means if one elementary school tends to have more G&T kids, that would be,
They would have more cluster sections in a grade level. And that might change year to year. Yeah, you might have one year, 2 the next.
I'm not encouraging this, I just want to know for clarity is, are you going to tell the students which cluster they're in?
There's really no need to tell us. It's really relevant. You're in Mrs. Jones's class.
Let's confirm.
Yeah.
And then, the one thing I didn't understand, so I do want more clarification, is in the middle school for 6 to 8, so which, I don't know the page number of the slides.
We're talking about the,
Your recommendation at the end, and then there.
that one?
Right, so what were you going to do implementing 6 to 8? Are you going to remove the current algebra, geometry?
No.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, what we're going to do is try to utilize cluster grouping at the middle school and see how that can work with the team structure. So that is something that Mr. Duke and I have talked about quite a bit, trying to see how does this work with the team. It's talked about a little bit in the research, but it is tricky because you're layering one scheduling model over another scheduling model. So that's some discussion, exactly what it's going to look like. But once again, the goal is, just distill it down, simplify to the most simple goal is, instead of a teacher having, plus and minus 2 grade levels. It's cutting that down, whether it's the middle to the +2, or the middle 3, or some other variety where they're not dealing with that spread. That's the goal. Even if we named it something different, we got our own Berners Township School District model that we use to give teachers a better heterogeneous mix, that would be fine. The research model is called this cluster grouping model. That's where we're starting our kind of basis. It's very easy K-5. It's going to be a little trickier 6-8.
So I just want to translate to my perception is you can do that in 6th grade, but then in 7th and 8th grade, you have a lot going on.
Yes?
You have the algebra and the geometry, and then you have even different levels.
You're saying my job would be very hard. No,
All right.
it is. It's difficult.
So you have some plan, some vision to work that out.
We are talking about what are the possibilities.
And then the last thing,
I will say this, algebra is staying in 7th grade and geometry is staying in 8th grade. So that's part of the thought. Those things are not moving. How we schedule them or how we group them, that might change. I don't know that yet. That's part of the stuff. Yeah.
you know, I have another question, go ahead.
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
Okay, the first one, when you're talking about doing your cluster grouping, are you grouping by just the math ability in the classrooms? This is in the K, or are you doing it by
Right, not necessarily.
overall?
Yeah, not necessarily. It can be done in a lot of different ways. So you can do it just by math. You can do the cluster group as being gifted in both math and ELA counts as the cluster. One or the other is the advanced. There's a lot of different ways to break it down. That's really going to depend upon us looking at the tools we have as far as student data, and deciding which of those tools speak to us. Generally, you want something that is ability-based and something that's achievement-based. Really is kind of the best blend. So you have something where showing ability and something showing achievement.
In terms of identifying?
Exactly, right? Because you might have a student who is not really achieving very well. Then you do an ability test and you find they're off the charts. Well, maybe they're not achieving because the model we have currently is not letting them achieve very well. They're just not engaged. So that's really the best model, but the question would be, how do we do that? And if you start looking at some ability tests, then you're talking about, once again, purchasing tests and money and time for testing. So the mechanics of that is something we have to work on, which is why that first year is really a year of building the program next year. So letting enrichment kind of hold us together for next year, using a better enrichment model along with some technology to improve the current program, as we design a really thorough cluster grouping model that accounts for all the things, including some of the things, how do we scale to the middle school, and selecting the tool we're going to use. And of course, informing parents as to how this is going to work mechanically for identification.
I have one more question. And what is going to be happening with K through 2 during all this time?
Yeah, well, K through 2, that is difficult because there are, even though the cluster group, and they say, well, you can take it down to grade 2, but students are still developmentally not, it doesn't really, it's not effective because developmentally it's challenging at those grade levels. They're still really working on such primary fundamental skills. And so for the beginning, we're really relying on an enrichment program, K2. What I would like to see is, like I said, once we have 4 staff members on board with, hopefully, for G&T, that I'd like to see the K2 receive some more support. And I foresee, I've already talked to Ms. Jones, we talked a little bit about how that might be something where we can get ELA more focused at the lower grade levels and more intimately weaved in to the curriculum for a gifted program. Ready, let's go. We'll go back and we'll loop it around.
Thanks. One thing I wanted to point out, I think you did highlight on year 1 and the second version, the difference is that you have 2 teachers with the second version.
Yes,
versus the
correct.
first is 1.
You are correct.
I think that's an important distinction.
Yes.
I think it's
Fiscally as well.
right, exactly. And I do think it's important, and I support doing that. I think this is a wonderful program to develop. My concerns are based on how do you figure out who gets in these clusters. And I know that, to me, that's a huge part of it. Because I'm not sure, if you look at the people who did the earliest math in 7th grade now, I don't know if you have the data, you can look back and see where those kids came from that are still in the district, because I'm guessing some of them that are there then weren't ready to be measured as gifted in 3rd grade. So I have concerns with kids being classified, because at the end of the day, people are going to know which class has this cluster. I mean, you can are we going to tell the kids? We're not, but, you know,
The
it's,
students will point out whoever in their class. I'll tell you for my kids, that kid's the smartest kid in my class.
right, if I
They
see a
all
bunch of
work
them all
together.
together, I know I'm not in that group. Now, it sounds like there's a lot of positives from coming to being the best in the other group, but making sure that you make the right identification is just, it's going to be very tricky, it seems to me. And that maybe some of the kids, as I said, are not maybe just developmentally ready. So are you going to make changes from year to year? Can you?
Yeah, let me just speak that real quick. So the difficulty really lies in the overlap. So when you have a cluster grouping model, you can, I did qualify in 3rd grade, and I took my test at the end of 3rd, and I qualified in 4th grade.
Okay.
So next year they place me into that cluster grouping classroom. Now the difficulty lies in the overlapping gifted mathematics program with the telescope curriculum. Because now I've missed my 3rd grade, I missed 3rd grade, which has a good chunk of 4th grade in it too for the 3rd graders. Now, the good news is that's probably not going to be a massive amount of students, right? And if we have an enrichment teacher who can flexibly group, well, okay, you're in the cluster this year. I know what you missed because I taught that cluster last year. I know exactly the pieces G&T make up. We're going to make them up with you as we go through grade 4, okay? And make sure that you're caught up with your grade level peers for the cluster. So that's kind of the idea of how you would fit them together, but that is the biggest difficulty. And even, of course, more so if you have a student who's not identified in 3 and not identified in 4, and then 5th, suddenly, there they are. How do you do that? Well, that's that idea of flexible grouping. That's really the solution to it, and why you need an enrichment teacher to make that happen. Otherwise, once again, that would be off the table because you wouldn't have any mechanical way to help that student catch up.
And another question is, the students who get into the 7th grade accelerated math, that seems to me like a bigger number than you currently have identified as gifted in the current, like, grade 3 cohort that you've sent letters out to, correct?
It is, yeah. And when you look at the grades, grade 7, and I know this is from, I was in the curriculum department for 10 years, and just sitting there with discussions with Dr. Palumbo and hearing about grade 7 mathematics, it's always been a contentious issue and a difficult thing, identifying the right kids and trying to get it right. When you look at the results of it, I mean, if you are in grade 7 algebra, what that gets you is, it gets you AP Calc 2 as a senior, right? If you're not in that cohort, you're in the 8th grade algebra cohort, that gets you AP Calc 1 as a senior. Not really shabby as far as math courses goes for a senior. So you do not get the, that would be the difference unless you find some other way to go about it. So that is something we've always looked at. And right now, when you look at the numbers historically, only about half the students, so that's what you get, right? That's your prize, right, for taking grade 7 algebra. Only half the students who start grade 7 algebra ever end up taking AP Calc 2 as a senior. So you have to question, why is that? Why are they deciding in high school that they go, I don't really need that course for what I want to do. I want to go a different route. I felt I've become passionate about something else. Is it that they were weak on those skills to begin with, they weren't quite ready, and they started to fall apart a little bit in high school, and felt like, I barely got through Calc 1, I didn't want to touch Calc 2 as a senior. So that's part of the problem, is we have this data which is a little suspicious, that makes us think maybe our identification was a little off in 7th grade, but there's nothing definitive as to why we're using such a large part of that 7th grade cohort, if the whole point of it is we're trying to develop a strong cohort of 7th grade algebra students so they end up taking and doing well on AP Calc 2 as seniors, which is the goal.
But we're having the option, right? So my last
Sure.
one is, I just hope we could make it erring side of having a larger group and a smaller group of people in this cohort, just because you don't want to miss kids who just aren't there yet.
Sure, no, absolutely. It's never an easy thing. It's not perfect at all.
I just want a little bit clarification on the reinvent the current binder and
Yes.
a little explanation of what the G&T people actually do in the classrooms, because are they going to only address the highest level only, or are they going to address all the classrooms? And one person can't do all the classrooms in one building. So what is it that they're going to actually do?
Sure, okay. I'll touch a little bit on that, but that's not the job description. This is kind of something we're trying to invent this tonight, right? I'll give you an idea of what I'm thinking. So the first part was the enrichment binders, right? So that was done last summer. We created binders for every teacher, grade level, and they are to use those with students that are identified and any student who thinks they can qualify for it. or can make use of it and do these programs. But when we gave them the survey, they said they needed more. The binders, they needed more from those binders. So that is what we're trying to do, is reinvent it. They said, you know, we have a lot of worksheets and more difficult problems, but how about something that's more creative thinking? How about something that's a little more thoughtful to challenge the students? So that's what we're trying to put together, is some enrichment program that is more useful to teachers as a tool. You know, where they're not saying, well, this is great, but you know, I blew through 5 minutes with this kid, and now I have nothing. And what do I do now? So trying to provide a broader scale of options to use for enrichment, and also some more, you know, complex enrichment. The other piece of it is, what do the teachers do? And I think I kind of touched on a little bit, is that when they start off, there's going to be a great deal of training, right? We're trying to train teachers. The critical part of this is, how do I differentiate for the students in my room? So the enrichment teachers are going to also be partial trainers of their peers. They are going to teach the flexible groupings in their classrooms. So that's, you know, the percentage of that, how that all works, is really up in the air, because we don't have it yet. We haven't decided on it. So if we come to that point where the board feels like this is the direction we're going to go, and we start to pursue hiring enrichment teachers, then that would all be part of the job description, which is something we put up all over.
On the example of classroom composition slide, the classroom A that contains the gifted cluster, the rest of the class is the average and the below average grouping. So this one teacher, they have the gifted teacher come in and do some of the teaching of the gifted group, or are they giving instruction for the gifted group and the remainder of class?
Both. So sometimes, depending on what the topic is. So if I'm doing a social studies lesson, maybe I'm doing that lesson today just by myself with my entire class. And maybe twice a week, the enrichment teacher's coming in and taking those students out, that cluster out, for the telescope math curriculum. Maybe they're taking them out for a science STEM curriculum. That's kind of the benefit of it. The flexible grouping lets us make the arrangements based upon what we see the need is in the classroom. So there's going to be some formalized, constructed time for those teachers where they're going to be assistant classroom teacher A with that cohort, because that telescope curriculum is a difficult piece of the puzzle, don't forget. Because if I'm teaching it, well, I'm teaching that classroom with that, I have 18 kids who are going to be in there going, what's going on here? Why are we doing 2 separate lessons? If I have another teacher, then it might be pushing where they come in to assist. It might be where they're coming out of the classroom to join up with somebody else. That's kind of something we have to work on. And unfortunately, until we have staff and training and we identify students to start making these arrangements of how they're going to play out, it's very difficult to say. That's one cluster group. What if there's 2? And now there's 2 on 4th grade too, and I have 2 schools for year 1. Yeah, it's something that becomes a little more difficult. So, you know, the end goal, if you kind of keep the long view in mind, is to have 1 teacher in every building so that they can be there for grades 3, 4, and 5 for the telescope curriculum for those, that's that group of students, those 8 students staying at a grade level, or 8 plus, right? There's no limited identification, as well as all those other things. Do we want to do a K2 ELA program for giftedness? Sure. Well, then we need those teachers to be able to be flexible to do that as well. So all those pieces of the puzzle we have to kind of build as we're determining if we're going to support having 4 teachers, and what other pieces of the puzzle we're going to be able to add in. Will we have the technology program? How much training time will we have? What tools will we use to identify kids? As that starts to gel, we'll be able to really be definitive and say, these teachers are teaching these sections this amount of time and have the schedule. But right now, it's all, if I said it, it's just kind of slow.
But I see your point on the other classrooms of grouping the high achieving and then having in-class support for the group 5, and having those students actually feel more confident in their abilities, as you explained. But classroom A, there's even a bigger gap now between your average group and the top cluster. Whenever the whole class is being instructed by 1 teacher, it seems like the group 3 and 4 students are going to feel farther behind. Because there's a bigger gap now between them and their top peers. So that A classroom, I just think that it could be discouraging for some of those students.
Yeah. Well, when I first looked at it, I thought this, geez, how does this work? There's two different cluster grouping research models that are fairly close, and both of them statistically showed growth in those students. So they seem to do better in all these models, because the reality is that the most important variable is still the teacher, right? So when you get down to it, the teacher in the classroom, that's the person who has the biggest impact. And what I'm doing with that model is I'm making their life a lot easier to do what they do naturally, which is meet the needs of all their students. So that's, I think, kind of the magic sauce in the cluster grouping model that's hard to really pull out, tease out from the rest of the information, is that when you're giving that teacher all of a sudden, like, it's like taking the burden off. Like, wow, I have these gifted students, but I'm getting help with that. I have a teacher helping me out, training me how to deal with them, so I'm giving them activities. And now I have these 18 kids. I can really delve into their needs, because I'm helping here, and I don't have a group that's really, really struggling badly. I have this group that I can really kind of sink my teeth into and do well with. And that, I believe, is really, they said this is still something ongoing research. So I think when some other, doctoral student decides they want to delve into exactly what's happening with that, the way to differentiate instruction and what's happening in the classrooms, I think they'll probably find that's the reality of why it's so successful with all the students, because the teachers now are able to do what we've been asking them to do for so long, and it's so difficult, and that is differentiate for everyone, which is mission impossible when I have, this kid way up here.
I remember when we moved algebra from 9th grade down to 8th grade, and we saw a tremendous increase in the performance of the math program. We didn't try and identify the gifted, we made it available to everyone, almost accelerating the program for everyone, as opposed to leaving some at the slower level. I think you're better off, of course it's an opinion. I'd like to see some data on what happens if you accelerate the whole program. What if you make that gifted group so much bigger, that give more students a chance to get into it? I'm very bothered by identifying the smart kids at 7, 8, 9. I don't think...
Well, I'll say, Mike, we are, don't forget, we're still accelerating students. The 8th grade algebra program, that's the majority of our students, right? So we are still according to the Common Core, we accelerated almost all
our
our
What
students.
if you moved that all down to 7? I think you'd find more students taking calculus 2 by the time they get to be seniors.
But we're not.
I understand
fine,
that,
yeah.
but I would argue that if you make that class bigger and not as restrictive as you're doing it, there'd be more students maturing, picking up the math, and you'd have a better result than trying to identify just a small few that can take algebra in 7th grade. I would do it the other way. I would move as many as possible down to 7th grade, make it less restrictive, hoping that and I want to see some data, because I think that would work in my mind. So I don't agree with the direction of taking the few. I'd rather make that few a much larger percentage and make the opportunity available, because I don't think you can measure, given the tutoring and everything else that's available, who's smarter than someone else. And I think you're going to hurt the middle student here. Well, the middle student who's potentially a top student, but because of your classification, you're not going to give that student the opportunity.
Well, don't forget, that student is still going to be categorized as private enrichment, right? You still have KE enrichment. So even though you might not be in the 7th grade algebra course, you are in the 8th grade algebra course, which is an enriched course by a grade level, right, based on Common Core.
Yeah, but Common Core, let's come back to Common Core.
I should have said those words.
That's right.
Why did I say that?
I mean, come on, that's a joke.
But that is
We have Obamacare and we're going to have Obama learning. I'm sorry, that's the way it is.
Anybody else have a question? Great. Thank you, everybody. Oh, well, it's board 4. I'm sorry. Yeah, there's okay, thank you.
Superintendent's report. Do I have a motion for items 1 through 3? Superintendent's report, please, Bev. Second, Elaine. Any questions or comments? Mike?
I'd like to ask for a little definition on what item 2 is. English is a second language, how many students are in it? Are we asking for a waiver? I had trouble reading that document.
I mean, when I read it, it was basically just a waiver that we don't have, we have our students in ESL, not in bilingual all day long, right? Is that what it is, John?
The ESL program is used to support students who come to the school district who speak another language. English may not be their native language or identified. The goal usually is to exit those students, and we have a test that we administer. Typically, those students are receiving ESL instruction in multiple subjects. It's not just math, language arts. It could be up to 5 subjects that they receive that instruction in. But the goal is that depending upon when those students enter the district, we're exiting them by the time they graduate.
It's almost a waiver.
It's not a waiver.
Because I think some of the programs, I thought encouraged the English as second language all the way through the program. In other words, K-12.
I don't think your microphone is on.
I thought some of the districts want English as a second language all the way through K-12 for the same students. In other words, nowhere would we push English to replace their native language.
Program, not here, right?
Well, that's what I was asking.
No. A bilingual program, they are taught in their native language, and that takes them longer to switch to English.
So
That's
this
not what
is
we have.
a more direct approach. Okay.
Anyone else?
I had another question on the bullying WAMs. What is SAC/EBS? HIV.
SAC is Student Assistance Counselor, and ABS is Anti-Bullying Specialist.
Okay, I'm not sure what those two jobs are. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mrs. Swarn?
Yes.
Dr. Vera?
Yes.
Mrs. Cassell?
Yes.
Mrs. McGowan?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McHugh?
Yes. We're up to public comments on agenda items. At this time, I'd like to open public comment. If you have a comment on something on the agenda tonight, please come up and write your name and address on the clipboard.
Hi, my name is Angela Edelhart. Just got a question regarding the presentation on the Gifted and Talented program. I was just wondering, I do see that the timeline for implementation is February 2015. I mean, not February, fall of 2015. Just wondering if there's some kind of ramp-up program or some planning stages for the year 2014 to 2015, and or if there is nothing in between that year, because the gifted and talented teachers aren't hired yet. Just the in terms of what is being implemented and planned for this upcoming school year.
My name is Anu Gupta. I am a public school graduate from New York. Participated in a Gifted and Talented program there and have a first grader in Mount Prospect. I want to commend the board for its commitment to using innovation in the curriculum and in the classroom settings. It's particularly impressive when you moved here with the adoption of the math assessment program and part of the NJ Ask. There are very few districts that are looking at innovative ways of using the top research to really advance their students. And I commend the board for doing that. I think tonight's presentation is another opportunity for this board to accelerate the timeline for gifted and talented individuals in the classroom from K through 8 level. I think that this is an innovative approach that uses the best research right now that really looks towards all students and recognizes that there are shortcomings of any program of this sort and tries to mitigate against them. I would urge on behalf of numerous parents who talk about this who may not be here tonight because of childcare responsibilities to look at an accelerated timeline for adopting this, recognizing that there are financial implications of the second timeline that has been proposed. And as a parent whose child participated in a pilot identification program using math and first grade and math, and getting a letter to say that her child did test out quite significantly and then struggling with her teacher and her and other parents and the school system to understand how to address her needs. I do believe that parents can be very important partners in piloting and thinking about different ways of identifying and phasing this in and providing feedback along the way. So I encourage the board and the superintendent's office to really use parents as partners because I think we really want this to be a win-win for all students and really not us versus them. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
I love the presentation. I think it's really exciting that we're thinking of adding something after all the years of not being able to add something. So I'm really excited for the families that it will help in our district as a whole. I just wanted to mention some thoughts because I've kind of been through this whole kind of thing just to maybe make a suggestion or thought. And I'm going to take the number 8 that they were saying we fit into the gift in town, which I know is not an accurate number, but I'm just saying that if year to year, if you were to use the criteria to put the students in and just say that a student drops down and therefore falls out of the program, what do you do with their psyche? And I can say from my own situation, my oldest tested into CML. I didn't do it because I didn't really approve of it. And then she didn't test into REAP, because back then you had REACH, until 8th grade. So did she all of a sudden get smarter? Maybe. I mean, she grew up, maybe she matured, maybe the criteria changed. I don't know exactly what happened, but it was a couple of years. It didn't affect her emotionally, but my concern is the kids will know who those 8 kids are, absolutely. And then if you drop out of that, I don't know, I'm just worried for them. So that's one thought. I also wonder, that 7th grade program, that accelerated 7th grade program, if you now have those 8 students, and you're accelerating them and helping them and whatever they do, wouldn't we assume that literally $350,000 later, that these kids would be beyond the 7th grade? Our current 7th, because if we're spending $350,000 and they end up exactly at the same place where they would enter the 7th grade accelerated program, what did we just do? Like, I don't know, that's what I was thinking about that. And then the other question is, would we allow the high achievers, that grouping, to test into the 7th grade program? I guess they would miss the boat. They're not in the, I don't know about that. And then the other thought I had is, I never knew that only half of the kids who were in the 7th grade program by the time they got to be seniors didn't end up in that. And I'm just wondering, because I know there's been submissions this year, is it because they didn't qualify? criteria for, because I know currently that's this year, but what about those other years where we have stats? Is it that they decided just to go to AP Stat because they really don't love calc anymore and they're not going to go into engineering? Or do they really not really qualify? Maybe they did. Maybe they got that teacher. Maybe they didn't focus on it anymore. Or I just want to know that. Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to really thank Dr. Hyman for his presentation tonight. It was really a long time coming, and you could really see there was a lot of research, a lot of time and effort that was put into it. And I was really pleased to hear it tonight. This was a great undertaking. Thank you. Couple questions. I'd like to know how the identification process would occur. I mean, PARC was mentioned as one possibility. How are those 5 cohort groups, how are they going to be identified? Is it going to be 5, or was this just for simplicity of the presentation? Will it be more, will it be less? Also, what if one student tests well in one area and not so well in a different area? There was math and ELA as 2 separate areas. I mean, there may be one student who is gifted in one particular section and not another. How's that going to be handled? I encourage the board to really consider these recommendations from Dr. Hyman. They're all research-based, as he's stated, and he also kept an eye on the costs. It seems like they were cost-effective, and I think this can benefit not only the high-achieving students, but the entire student body. The teacher's attention can be better focused on the different groups for the benefit of all students, not just the high achievers. All 5 groups can benefit. Thank you.
By default, it's 4 Wolf Lane. Again, just to reiterate some of the things that my husband just mentioned, I have to say, Dr. Hunt, I completely applaud you. I'm very thankful for this presentation. I think it's exactly what our group, the Vernon Township Parents for an Advanced Curriculum, have been asking for over a year now. And I think that this plan is, I think it's brilliant. I think it's research-based evidence. I think it's cost-effective. And I think it empowers our teachers, which is critical. And to use your words, I believe it's a win-win situation for everyone. From my perspective, you addressed all the concerns that were brought up by the board. And I would just urge the board to listen to this gentleman. He's done his homework, and I really think he knows what he's talking about. And I think it would benefit all the children, as he said. So, again, thank you so much for the presentation, for your effort, and for your knowledge, and for sharing it with us, and for caring about our children, and for really trying to meet the needs of our gifted and talented children. So again, I would urge the board to listen to these recommendations. Thank you.
My name is Linda Borshine. My husband and I moved here when my now 6th grader was in kindergarten. And we really appreciated the quality of the education you got at Cedar Hill and this year at Williams. On the topic of the G&T program, I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice today. I really like the innovation of the program that was suggested, and I especially appreciate the fact that we're looking through a G&T program to elevate all the students and not just focus on the small slice of particularly gifted individuals. On that point, I would also like to encourage the board to seriously consider enlarging the 7th grade algebra program, like, I'm sorry to clear your name, but this gentleman suggested. I've realized this year that I've been, I don't know, maybe a little naive about the getting into the 7th grade algebra program. As I've recently been talking to a number of other parents, they've been talking about the special tutoring that they have been having their children receive for years or more in order to, get the right grade on the math test and get them into that program. And I worry that some parents who maybe don't have the financial ability to get this extra help in addition to the school may be missing out of that program. I think tracking students as early as 7th grade to get them all the way through high school without having the ability to really jump tracks is it's a little unfortunate to target kids that young. So I think having a broader population able to get into that that program might benefit the district as a whole. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the presentation. It's exactly what we're looking for. We've done some research, we use some information that's about fully what we were hoping for. So for the board, I hope it's going to be implemented sooner or later. So thank you very much, and we're very much looking forward to that program. Thanks. My name is Pam Crow, and I'm living at Golden Grove. I'm here, and I want to give a big applause to Dr. Hanneman. I think that the presentation is very impressive. And there are basically, I would say, I learned that two concerns. One is that about how to identify our kids. Another is about that the psychic part of the kids we pull from that the better class to a lower class. I would like to share some of my thoughts about that. First of all, I believe that nowadays, even every school year, we still, transfer kids from this class to another. There is no steady, defined class for each of the students. So even after we implemented the cluster program, I think that it's very natural to have one kid be pulled up from one class to another. It doesn't necessarily mean that this kid is doing poorly, doing not as good as last year. It all depends that how much time, maybe this school year they spend more time on their sports or something. So I don't think if the kids, if their feeling will be hurt some way by this. Anyway, even with our current program, that the kids which are not performing as well as others, their feeling will still be hurting. Because based on my daughter in her class, she told me that sometimes kids will be speaking about the other says, okay, she doesn't even know how to spell this word or that. So in any way or other, that if the kids' feeling will be hurt, it's not because of the program. It's because of all other reasons. So I think that in the long run and in general, this program will help overall more instead of hurting people. I think think kids need to learn to adjust all the exchanges between classes. And also, when we define the classes, there is no strict line says, okay, this is beyond this line, these kids will belong this class, and the others will belong to other. Because kids they are growing. By the years that they could grow from one class to the other. As Dr. Hanna has mentioned that this is a flexible program. So kids that they can jump from one class to other. But the best benefits is that now our teachers, they will have more time to focus on a certain group of people. They have better control in the class. And my daughter is in Cedar Hill, and I very much appreciate all the time and effort from Cedar Hill administrations and her current teacher, Mrs. Heidman, because I can feel how difficult this teacher is doing with the class because of the variety of the levels of the students. So I would say that I would encourage the board, consider to adopt this program sooner than later. And I very much appreciate your time and efforts in looking into this. I think this is going to be very well welcomed by all the parents in this school district. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Hanna, and thank you, Cedar Hill, principal and administrations. Very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Good evening. KG Swan, 60 Linden Drive. At the risk of being redundant, thank you, Dr. Hyman. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you to the board, Mr. Markarian, for supporting the effort. That was a lot of information, and we appreciate it. And it is very much what we're looking to learn and discuss for the past year or years. At many of these meetings in the past, many of the board members have had very reasonable concerns about a possible G&T program. And I think the recurrent theme was that they were worried that these programs could affect the other students negatively, and they wanted to make sure that any future program benefited all the students. And of course, we were all worried about the cost. And I think Dr. Heinemann said that this model allows the teachers to meet the needs of all the students, and because it empowers the teachers. And that is exactly what we feel like we were looking for the past several years. The teachers are awesome. They try very hard here. Mrs. Soto and Mr. Malika have been terrific at Cedar Hill this year, trying to give us exactly what we're hoping for, but their hands have been tied. And they haven't been empowered to be able to help the really gifted kids like they would like to. So if this is truly implemented, it sounds like it could be just what is needed. Mr. Byrne mentioned that you may not be able to measure who's smart. There may be some truth to that. But I can tell you that my son was very smart. And anyone who's come in contact with him would agree. It's not based on tests. It's based on what the teachers say. It's based on what his peers say. Based on what everybody else says. And there's never been any private tutoring. And there's no coaching along here. I don't even believe in this private tutoring. All I want is my kid to be challenged every day. And I think that's what most of the people with the BT PAC group feel. We shouldn't have to go to after-school programs or summer programs to try to meet our kids, to challenge our kids. So I do think that this gives us that opportunity to address those kids who at least the parents may think they're smart, but maybe we can really identify them and then address it accordingly. Finally, I did want to make a comment on the binders. We talked about reinventing the binders for enrichment. In our view, the binders have been somewhat of a waste of time. They seem more punitive to the kids who take this information home with them. They have to do their regular work and then the binder work, and it's just duplicative. Okay, it's not more challenging. So if we're going to reinvent the binders, I would encourage it to be more challenging, and perhaps if the kids who are going to be using those could be excused from at least some of the regular curriculum and have the binders replace it. Thank you for listening.
Good evening. My name is Matt Shelley, 105 Burner Drive. Dr. Heineman, that was a very impressive presentation. The research and the guidance and the recommendation are very sound. They make a lot of sense. I'm a parent of 3 Cedar Hill students. My family's new to the district. We joined this past summer. We had the benefit of spending 5 years overseas. While I was on an expat assignment, my children got the benefit of top-notch international schools. And the presentation and the recommendation that you gave was very consistent with what we saw at the 3 international schools my children attended. And I think that this is exactly what the school needs to do to be able to continue to be on the leading edge, innovation, to be able to make sure that the reputation grows even stronger in the future. The recommendation was well researched. It's going to benefit all students, and most importantly, it's going to benefit and motivate our teachers even further. So I would strongly encourage the board to consider this recommendation. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is George Avirapal. I'm a mathematics professor and as a passionate teacher who understands the logistics and the logic of efficiency in the classroom. I applaud the effort Dr. Heinemann put into for the entire spectrum of classroom into narrower bands. I strongly believe that identifying these bands of this large spectrum of the students can definitely help student achievement across all levels. I have a question to Dr. Heinemann. I saw there was one band at the top and then 3 uniform bands at the lower level. Whether we can make it spread across into 4 different bands, that would make learning more efficient. Again, that's just my thoughts on this. Again, I appreciate your hard work bringing this proposal out.
Hi, I'm Yanina Hecht, 11 Briar Lane, and I'm going to keep this short because I echo the sentiments that everyone else had just expressed. I too want to commend Dr. Heinemann for a stellar presentation. I agree with Mrs. Faltis that this is everything that we've been asking for, especially at the elementary level. All of our concerns were addressed with potential solutions, acknowledging that there is no one perfect answer for every need, but this plan does a superb job at trying to meet the needs of our gifted and talented students, as well as the whole student body. I urge the board to endorse Dr. Heinemann's recommendations. I believe that this program will distinguish our district from all others, and if implemented, will become a model for other districts. So I want to thank you for that, and I do need to say that if, by all means, if you think that funding is a stumbling block, don't let that stop you, because if we could say full-day kindergarten, we'll certainly find a creative way to get funding for gifted and talented program. Thank you.
Can't see if there's anyone else down there coming up for public comment. No? Okay. At this time, I'd like to close public comment on agenda items. We're up to committee reports. Finance. Somebody want to make a motion on items? How many items are there? I'd like to do item 1 to 7. Second. Beth?
Actually, I think I'd like to ask, I know we got one thing that's a note here is that we did get new bids on the high school fitness center, but since you're more familiar with it,
Actually, let me start off by saying that we do have a couple of items. First of all, there is a resolution to award of this purchase for $600,000 for the purchase of the Chromebooks. Very successful full process on that. The interest rate originally we thought we were going to have to pay was 1.5%. It came in at 0.845%. I think the total interest cost is somewhere around maybe less than $1,600 for $600,000 for 3 years. So we were very lucky with that. So that's the first item that's on the agenda there in terms of any significance. It's not standard housekeeping. We also have item number 6, which is the award of the Liberty Corner School parking lot improvements. We had 4 bidders for that, and Hillcrest was the winning low bid, meeting all requirements of the bid, and we will propose to the board awarding all the alternates of all the work that's originally presented to the board, and also at the budget presentation for that parking lot repavement be taken care of. Item number 7, I believe was the first item that they were referring to, Mrs. Casal, and that we did receive on June 3rd 2 bids, and this was the second time we rebid the middle school foods room renovation and the Ridge High School fitness center renovation. We had it structured in alternates so that we would have the option of awarding those pieces that were within our budget. And the foods room at William Manning base bid $430,101, and what we would elect to take the 2 deduct alternates would bring us in within budget for that project. However, we would propose to the board not to award the wellness center project, as that is still significantly over budget. I believe we have Mr. Kellner here, who is the CEO of Stiesel Architectural Group tonight. If the board has any questions about why we believe that may be over budget, I can tell you that we have worked yet again with the firm, and we re-advertised that effectively. It'll be in the newspapers as of this Wednesday for yet a 3rd bid to try to see if we can get a little bit lower bid. Would you like to come and speak for a moment for that?
Thank you. Tony and Scott had conflicts, so you get the 3rd strike. Sorry. Well, we were seriously disappointed in the numbers as ourselves, as you can imagine, because of all the changes that were made, which we honestly believe should have brought it to the number that we expected. It didn't happen. So Tony's actually notes for me, I know specifically the numbers. By our accounting, the HVAC is at like 170, and it really should be no more than 60, and we think less than that. So there's a six-figure differential there on just on the HVAC alone. The GC work for moving the washer dryer is dreadfully over as well, like 25,000. That's something, by the way, that we feel the district could actually do themselves. It's very simple. The circuit is there, and by my understanding, it's a washer dryer. So how these numbers come to be is, we can talk about that. The vinyl flooring is also a bit high. $50,000 or so. And there were other margins, but if you add all those up, those items themselves should have come back, to where it should have been. Why? It can be a lot of things. Timing, we do see this time of year as the summer is coming close. That happens. The grants are out there. Whether the contractors were busy or not, subcontractors, because of that, often we see less competitive pricing. It does happen. Not that it's going to make us happy, but knowing that the market is busy, sometimes they'll throw a number out there to tell them that they won't accept it because they don't, they've got time available. What we're proposing, what we think we should do is we'll personally contact subcontractors in the area that we know and see if they will come in to work with GC to get it, and we'll give them the kinds of specs that they need to do that work. Another idea that surfaced is extending the completion date for the HVAC component and the aerobics room to October 15th or later, which is part of the process that they think. And then the other one was to do the self-perform, the relocation of the washer and dryer, which again should really be a simple thing that saves a very large amount of money in itself. So that's a high level view. From our perspective, I'm not sure what else we can say about it. The drawings and the design, the work that was removed, again, is in the documentation and should have brought the number back. It didn't. So we think we should go through these processes to affect the change that we think should be here. And bring the number into where it needs to be. So we're committed to that. We will continue working to make it happen. We can't make the number here, but we can bring the documents into the place, little documents in the process to bring it out. So, we're committed to it. We'll keep going. We'll keep working with you. Tony's committed to it, and I'll keep showing up. I'm here. Yes, Tony. But we got to make it happen. So.
Even with moving the HVAC system from the roof and just rebuilding what we had, that didn't, $170,000 for that seems.
Actually, it's a little more than that, I think.
Yeah.
Because the $170,000 does not include the air deal units that are in the main space that also have to be replenished. So at 170, you have to hit the $65,000 that's down there as the alternate bid, which is the two air deal units.
And that's our entire budget.
Well, yeah, right there, you're looking at $235,000, and it doesn't make any sense when you look at the air deal unit costs. They're $14,000 a piece. Now, obviously, subcontractors are entitled to make a markup on that, and they have some labor, but that's using essentially the existing infrastructure of those two air deal units. It doesn't make any sense to us, and it really seems to be the HVAC subcontracting costs that are a large part of the problem. I don't think anyone has that. We continue to drill down. Obviously, with the second rebid, we were able to get the cost within the budget for the renovation of the food room. And we saw this as a much actually simpler project in some respects. There's less HVAC
That's a question I asked Mr. Howlett and Mr. Shello to weigh in on in terms of the impact to the programs and whether or not they could find another way.
On the foods room, what alternates 2 and 4 are we taking out to get down to the budget?
Actually, it was the way, and I think, Mr. Gunner, if you can come back up and speak to that, it was actually the way that Mr. Quintana had structured it. They're deducts and costs, but they're not removable. They're not actually reducing the scope. And only he can explain that, because honestly, only he can explain that. And we queried him on that. It's not a reduction in the scope of the work, but the way he structured it, I think it's because he had it built into the base, and then he had it out as a deduct.
Yeah, I'm gonna be less helpful on that description. What I can do is I'll get with Tony immediately. Well, I can, if you want, I can call him right now, actually. Come back.
My understanding, to be honest, is that it's not a reduction in the scope.
No, I agree with that.
From what we originally envisioned. To be clear, we aren't awarding 2 alternates there. And the primary one is that there's an engineer work going out to the courtyard, which doesn't exist right now. And the cost of that is just, again, something that doesn't seem, it's $18,000 for the door. We think we'd be better served. That would put us over budget, first of all. But given the nature of that, that is always something that we go back at some future point in time and still do a separate project, and a couple of quotes will probably get versus less. Things are, for whatever reasons, are crazy in terms of pricing.
I'm really concerned about the schedule. You said
Well, that's only for the wellness center. That doesn't affect the foods room. The foods room where we would be awarding tonight, if you approve it, which would mean that would go off as originally scheduled. And, they be in there, they be in there the 23rd of June and ready to go. The intent is to have it, ready by the time students arrive September 4th.
So do you have a backup plan for the gym if we can't get a bid in time?
Meet backup plan meeting to get it done still this summer, or to get it done at all?
Well, I don't know about getting it done at all, but I'm just saying that if you can't do it by September, are you going to wait for a year? Or are you going to try and do it while school is going on? Do you have a plan?
I think that obviously the best situation is to be able to do it in the summertime when the students aren't there. We've got equipment in there that has to be relocated somewhere. Where is that equipment going to be stored? If, there isn't a space that students aren't occupying because they're there. So ideally, it would be a project that we want to do in the summer. I did put it to Frank and Rich to say, if we were able to be fortunate enough to make this work and come back to you in July and say that we got a bid that's at budget, how quickly could they work and get it done? Could they do it in August alone? Probably not. But maybe between August and September, maybe then they could do it and it's ready by October 1st. But again, I need to know from Frank and Rich if that's a situation that they can live with and manage with in terms of the programs. If it's not, then realistically we're looking at maybe next summer.
So when we get the answer from Frank and Rich?
Well, I don't know when I'm going to get the answer from them, but I also need the answer from whether or not it's even possible to do. Are we even going to get a bid back that's not $400,000? So those two things need to kind of come in together.
So these were bid at the same time, and both of these contractors bid on both of these projects, is that how this reads?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm just concerned if the health center was so know we're able to get the foods room into our budget, I mean, it just kind of goes on the same line of reasoning that it's everything as well. So,
We
I'm
did look
concerned
at that,
about
we looked at that,
reporting.
yeah, we looked at that very carefully, and I think that, you know, when you do the postmortem on it, if you will, that, you know, we looked at it initially, and we felt that, you know, the original HVA system was way more involved in what was necessary to achieve our end goal, and redesign. And Mr. Harding came in and made a presentation to the facilities committee about that. And I think we were correct in that assumption. I think what Mr. Kellner has said tonight is fine as well, but the fact that when we look at this and analyze this second bid, that what's really driving the wellness center being over is the subcontractor bids for the mechanicals for the HVAC. The food room, to be clear, has virtually nothing in it in terms of that work. You know, it's got a couple of vents that are in there, so maybe it's $15,000 of the total work there. You know, it seems that's the biggest driver, really, that it was the HVAC. If it weren't for the HVAC, yes, the Mondo flooring is expensive, but, you know, argument could be made that the HVAC is more than $100,000 over budget. We started to drill down further into pieces of it. And even also this relocation of the washer dryer, because one of the original options was to just put it directly across the hall where there's another utility space. There's also a hot water heater in there. We had to have a turned out very expensive piece of equipment called a makeup system for glass. As Mr. Kellner explained what that is, but essentially what it does is it compensates for additional air being taken out of that space so that it doesn't starve essentially the oxygen that's needed to a hot water heater. And that was an expensive piece. So it was $25,000 just for the GC's work, but there's probably another $8,000 or $10,000 in there just for that. They've pulled that out now and redesigned it and put it in a location where that's unnecessary. And we're potentially looking at, you know, can we do that, you know, with some small subcontracting job in our Orange outside of it. So those are really the two big pieces. The HVAC is really the driver there. You just don't have that. So we don't feel that, you know, when you look at the rest of the work that's being done in the food room, you know, that those pieces are really, you know, the general. There's some plumbing there, but there's no HVAC. There's electrical there, but, you know, when we redesigned that work, that's what brought it, you know, the second around, that's what brought it in. This is what the original budget was for this going way back. So we were pretty comfortable, you know, that generally the estimating of the budgets were, you know, on the part of our architect, did good. You know, the HVAC is still some bit of a puzzle. These subs are so high.
I want to thank you for not trying to find the money and hold the line. This is so far on the line. Thank you for watching.
But we're still trying to get the project done, so we don't
I
have to get
understand. I think we should.
Ready for roll call?
I had a couple more questions.
Sorry.
Item number 5. I don't think I understand that at all.
Item number 5 is simply that these are the No Child Left Behind funds. And the first step in that process is simply for the board to approve submission of a proposed program plan and budget for those funds. Those are the funds, obviously, that we've received almost time immemorial. The Title II is used in district. Title III, we've done in consortium generally with Bedminster in the past. So all we're doing here, Mike, is saying that, you know, we approve the acceptance of these funds, that we're going to submit the budget. There'll be another motion when it's actually finally submitted. I remember from the NCLE process, approval process, correct?
I thought No Child Left Behind was scrapped at this point.
all this, these are recurrent funds that we've had for quite some time now, and it's just the first step in the process. This is the DOE saying that they've gotten notice from the federal government, these entitlement funds are, you know, what.
Now, I thought I had one more, and I'll just see what I do. I do not.
Roll call,
Mr. Burr?
Yes.
Mrs. Warner?
Yes.
Dr. Vera?
Yes.
Mrs. Cassell?
Yes.
Mrs. McGowan?
yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Woodbridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McHugh?
Yes.
Madam President.
Now we have a motion for items 1 through 17 on personnel. Deb?
I move items number 1 through 17 on personnel. Any questions?
I have one very quick one on 15. Are the firemen, why are they getting paid differently?
That's to account for the time that they're working. So we have 2 staff members working with one class, but they won't be in the class at the same time. So you might have one teacher covering the class for the first couple of weeks, and the other teacher will take over the class. So it's based on the amount of time they're teaching. Yep, yep.
Thank you.
And the rate, approximately,
It's $8,500 per class. So it's being split between the 2 teachers based on the amount of time that they're covering the class.
Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Burr?
yes.
Mrs. Warner?
Yes.
Dr. Vera?
Yes.
Mrs. Cassell?
Yes.
Mrs. McGowan?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Woodbridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McHugh?
Yes. Go up to curriculum.
Okay, so I have a report on the May 22nd meeting. Now, a large part of that meeting was the Gifted and Talented presentation, so Dr. Hyman's already taken care of that. We did talk about a few other brief items. One of them was word study in the Common Core English Language Arts in grades K through 2. The district is ordering 60 copies of the book Phonics Lessons by Countess and Pinnell, and it's a companion teaching resources binder, so that every K through 2 teacher has a set of resources for teaching phonics lessons. This purchase does not require board approval. The high school summer reading list is now available. We talked very briefly about AP Computer Science. It's currently not offered at Ridge, but it could be added possibly as an elective for the 2015-16 school year.